Okay, we are officially live. This is the second official video of the Steps to Start a Renaissance class. I am Mr. Responsible. I thank you guys for tuning in once again. We have been going over the steps to start a Renaissance, and we basically went through the process of defining what a Renaissance actually is before we went into the aspect of basically clarifying what is our steps to get towards that in the 21st century versus what we already have experienced in terms of the 20th century. So what we spoke on the first class was more of the phoenix rising metaphor, and it starts off with the death, the burning, which is the disappearance of a cultural practices and further suppression that's self-inflicted or responds to a forced assimilation by an unnatural sequence of events. And we talk about the similarities between African American cultures and African cultures in the response to more of like the suppression tactics in the 20th centuries when they had like the lack of civil rights for African Americans in terms of transitioning from the slave trade into now becoming more citizenships, and then also with the apartheid in South Africa and how both of these, started to um, have some level of response where they had people that was liberated in terms of African American sense and being able to now express, the situation at the end, and that was like the intellectual front. And we spoke on the likes of the W.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington's, and how those figures kind of started to contextualize what was going on in terms of the issues that was being faced, and from there, people was be able to get more awareness, and it kind of emerged into more expression in terms of the Harlem Renaissance, where this consciousness was arising, and it kind of just graduated further and further to the point where because it's now in a format where it's not only based in towards intellectualism, it's now in the field in terms of music, dance, and the orature of African Americans. It's now being able to be picked up on a world scale, on a global scale, and it kind of influenced some of those in South Africa to where the Sophiatown, Renaissance emerged, and they had the drum writers and the District Six writers that was able to contribute to speaking about their own situations. So this is where we are now in the ashes aspect of the resurgence of the phoenix. And the ashes more is the myriad of expression in different mediums that analyzes the shifts of a marginalized people from one state to another while fighting to survive and capture the emotions involved. So this is what is kind of being taken place in the midst of the ashes, is when after the burning of the cultural practices, in order for something to emerge and for a rebirth to take place, they got to have the myriad of expressions that's taking place, that leaves like a remnant for people to, like us in the 21st century, to kind of tap back into what is going on and understand how we can kind of utilize the wisdom from what they was going through to be able to strengthen our offerings. So we're going to really dive in deep about the ashes. And another aspect of what we wanted to frame it as is basically like in the first phase, it was more of the obstacle, which is what the intellectual front was, contextualizing the circumstances faced by the masses for current or future awareness with hopes of ascending as a collective. So that is what the first phase was about, where you can kind of tap into that episode on the part one of this Steps to Start a Renaissance. But now we're going into the miracle, which is the worldwide expansion of enlightenment, creating separate societies that may combat similar struggles while choosing distinctive customs over one way. Because in the midst of being awakened, in terms of what was happening in America amongst African Americans, you also can be awakened in terms of what's going on with South Africa by that influence, but it kind of has to be contextualized to what you have going on in your specific realm and your specific, environment. So, in the mass of this worldwide expansion of enlightenment, you still have to create these mirrors of a society that's been, combating similar struggles, but now it's choosing a distinctive customs and ways that you can go about it based upon your own situation. And this is what happened where we left off on the last section of the obstacle, is that in the midst of the W.B. Du Bois and the intellectual front that was taking place, W.B. Du Bois may have had some level of approach, and then they had the Booker T. of Washington's that had a different type of approach, but it didn't like necessarily have to be right or wrong in terms of the conflicts that was taking place. It was more of something that as we look back, whatever our connection point and whatever type of way that we want to approach it, there's somebody that we can tap into when they have this kaleidoscope of different versions of how to approach the struggle. and to uplift out of the struggle and to express yourself in the struggle. And in the Harlem Renaissance, it was also in that some people may be more attracted to the music, some may be more attracted to the dance, some may be more attracted to just the artistry. So all around, the literature, everybody had a different connection point, and it left like something for us to all be able to tap into. And it's not just one way that you can go about it. And this kind of emerged in South Africa as well, when they had some level of, different ways of tackling, how they wanted to kind of express themselves in this newly liberated sense. So we're going to go directly into passage 5. And the last thing we left off was just speaking about the global spreading of what was happening in terms of the influence of the Harlem Renaissance and how it has reached, Sophiatown Renaissance. So, adding to the canonical critiques that exhibited the struggles of marginalized people worldwide, upheld the continuing analysis of what was being faced. Persistent antagonistic circumstances emphasized the relevance of these dialogues, motivating renewed retrieval by more recently confined contesters. So these the canon of critiques that was exhibiting the struggles of marginalized people is what is now being added onto when you have the aspects of people in South Africa now contributing to what is being faced. And it's not only just from coming from an African American viewpoint when it's now being spread, and there's other viewpoints of how they're also going through some level of struggle, and now they can add to the canon of understanding of how this stuff is basically affecting them. So persistent antagonistic circumstances emphasize the relevance of these dialogues, motivating renewal retrieval by more recently confined contestants. So as we continue to be confined in our own sense, we can kind of see that the antagonistic circumstances that was happening in the early or the mid 20th century, it allows for the expression that was taking place then to kind of relate to what we have going on today. And it's something that we can kind of always be able to excavate and understand a little bit of a deeper way of how we can approach it versus starting from a fresh and acting like we are the only people that are experiencing, any type of struggle that we may be facing. It may be on a different level, like they may have more of a, technological uh, element to it, or like the unemployment element, or just any type of facing things that we are currently going through. This stuff was already faced in a sense, and they had people that was expressing themselves, and it allows for us to now, see that no matter how persistent the antagonistic nature of this post-colonial or this post-transatlantic slave trade situation is, we always have something to tap back into now that we have this 20th century renaissance, and hopefully for the future we will be able to create 21st century renaissance for people to tap into. So the excavation from this particular confinement of the modern souls of Black folk in America layered a language barrier that puzzled foreign counterparts when encountering the English output of colonized voices. So as these people in South Africa was starting to get a better understanding of what they was going through, it also was a texture of, they had to kind of like go through the layer of the language barrier to kind of really fully understand what the expression was in America in terms of the souls of Black folks, which is the book by W.B. Du Bois that talks about the double consciousness of trying to fit into this assimilation, but also trying to have some integrity of who you actually are. And that emerges amongst, African Americans in this scenario. And then, it's also happening amongst, the Africans in Southern Africa when they are trying to basically adjust to their native tongue, but also seeing that there's some level of having to understand this new vernacular of English to be able to,